In modern society, there is a prevailing inclination to view time as the most valuable resource an individual can have. Individuals safeguard it, enhance it, quantify it, and frequently experience a persistent sense of scarcity regarding it. Nevertheless, beneath the apprehension related to time, there could be an even scarcer resource that is being subtly depleted. That resource is existence itself. This is not existence in a vague philosophical context, but rather the tangible reality of simply being present. The finite journey of consciousness navigating through days, relationships, choices, distractions, routines, and unique moments that never truly replicate. Yet, a significant portion of life is organized in ways that dissuade us from experiencing this directly. There is always another obligation, another update, another future goal to which our focus can shift. The mind becomes preoccupied with management, while the experience of existence fades into the background. Perhaps this explains why individuals can feel oddly detached from their own lives, even while remaining incessantly engaged within them. For existence is not merely a process that continues on its own. It is also something that can be experienced with greater awareness or with less awareness. The discussion today is not fundamentally about productivity or mortality in the traditional sense. It seeks to examine more closely what occurs when existence itself is recognized as the ultimate limited human resource. Not merely something to be optimized mechanically, but rather something to which we can relate with increased presence, attention, and care. When contemplating the structure of contemporary life, it often appears that individuals are acutely conscious of scarcity, specifically the scarcity of time, energy, attention, and opportunity. However, concurrently, there seems to be a surprising lack of direct contemplation regarding existence as a finite entity. Individuals engage in extensive planning for the future, meticulously manage their responsibilities, and remain perpetually busy. Yet they may seldom take a moment to reflect on the profound reality that their lived experience, their very existence, is gradually being consumed by these activities. What do you believe accounts for this profound awareness being so elusive for many, even as life itself seems to accelerate and become more fragile?
I believe one reason for this phenomenon is that contemporary life favors abstraction over genuine presence. Individuals are instructed from a young age to engage with life through management systems such as managing time, identity, progress, and risk. While these frameworks are often practical and necessary, they also foster a detachment from the authentic experience of being. Consequently, a person becomes preoccupied with organizing their life instead of fully experiencing it. Moreover, since these structures are socially endorsed, they seldom seem out of the ordinary. Continuous engagement becomes linked with responsibility and seriousness. Meanwhile, reflection is frequently deferred to a future time when circumstances are imagined to be stable enough to permit it. However, that moment rarely materializes. Another factor to consider is psychological protection. Experiencing existence directly also entails confronting limitations directly. It involves acknowledging that experiences are finite, attention is limited, relationships are temporary, and even different versions of oneself are transient. This realization can induce vulnerability as it disrupts the illusion that life can be endlessly restored. Thus, the mind often opts for movement. Ongoing activity offers a form of emotional insulation. As long as attention is focused outward on tasks and future objectives, deeper existential awareness remains subdued in the background. I also contend that speed is a significant factor. Acceleration condenses experience. As life moves swiftly, experiences are handled in a practical way instead of being profoundly experienced. Days transform into units of execution rather than lived experiences rich with texture and presence. Over time, this results in a peculiar paradox. Individuals become increasingly adept at living while simultaneously feeling less connected to the reality of their existence. Life itself starts to seem subordinate to the act of performing within life. What complicates this situation is that nothing seems amiss on the surface. An individual may exhibit productivity, responsibility, and even success, while internally grappling with a subtle feeling of detachment from their own existence. This is not due to a lack of experiences, but rather because experiences are perpetually being transformed into a pursuit of something else. This may explain why the awareness feels so remote. To acknowledge existence as finite necessitates a pause long enough to perceive life not just as a series of duties, but as something unique that is both unfolding and vanishing at the same time. Such recognition can be disconcerting. However, it can also bring a renewed depth to everyday life in a manner that constant haste cannot.
There appears to be a cultural inclination to regard existence in an almost instrumental manner, as if the worth of life is predominantly assessed through output, accomplishments, visibility, or accumulation. Moreover, even rest is frequently contextualized concerning future productivity. Focus is so consistently directed toward usefulness that merely existing without immediate performance may start to feel strange or even unsettling. Do you believe that numerous individuals inadvertently disconnect from the experience of being alive due to an excessive identification with what they produce, sustain, or optimize?
Indeed, I believe this occurs quite subtly and frequently. An individual may gradually start to perceive themselves mainly through their functions. Their worth becomes linked to their contributions, accomplishments, maintenance, or enhancements. Furthermore, since external systems tend to reward quantifiable outcomes more prominently than internal presence, this identification intensifies over time. The challenge lies in the fact that performance lacks a natural conclusion. There is perpetually another level of optimization to pursue, another expectation to meet, another comparison to engage in. Consequently, existence gradually turns conditional. A person may feel allowed to rest, to feel complete, or to experience sufficiency only temporarily and typically only after demonstrating something first. This engenders a subtle disconnection from the experience of being alive itself. As existence is no longer perceived as inherently significant, it becomes validated indirectly through its utility. Once this perspective is internalized, moments of stillness can appear psychologically daunting. If one's identity has been structured around activity and output, then periods without visible productivity may start to seem hollow rather than rejuvenating. I believe this is the reason many individuals find it challenging to stay present even during moments they ostensibly cherish. Rest becomes a struggle. Conversations become somewhat distracted. Leisure is subjected to optimization. Even significant moments are unconsciously evaluated against efficiency or future usefulness. The mind remains positioned slightly ahead of life rather than fully immersed in it. Another outcome is that individuals start to perceive themselves as perpetual projects instead of as living entities. There is incessant refinement, ongoing assessment, and relentless pressure to evolve. However, the process of becoming can subtly overshadow the state of being if there is no opportunity to simply engage with existence devoid of the need for enhancement. This also impacts emotional well-being. Individuals may experience a sense of disconnection not due to a lack of stimulation in life, but rather because stimulation is supplanting genuine contact. There is a constant flurry of activity, yet a restricted depth of presence within that very activity. Thus, I believe many individuals gradually forfeit their intimacy with existence by overly identifying with their functions. Not out of intention, but because modern culture facilitates a confusion between utility and vitality. The unfortunate reality is that a person can achieve significant success in managing life externally while remaining only partially engaged in the true experience of living it.
In your personal observations of individuals, or perhaps in your own experiences, what typically changes internally when a person starts to view existence less as something to control and more as something they are actively engaging with? This does not necessarily involve a dramatic change in their circumstances, but rather a transformation in the quality of attention they apply to everyday life.
What frequently changes first is the speed of perception. Life ceases to feel entirely transactional. Moments are no longer solely experienced in terms of their outcomes or what they lead to. An individual starts to notice texture once more, the emotional ambience of a conversation, the sensation of a location, the quiet weight of time passing. Common experiences regain their depth. There is also a subtle alteration in focus. Rather than perpetually advancing toward the next obligation or result, attention becomes more adept at remaining with what is genuinely occurring in the present. Not perfectly or continuously, but with greater awareness. This profoundly alters emotional experiences. Individuals often realize that much of their fatigue stemmed not just from effort but from psychological distance. They were physically present while mentally residing elsewhere, anticipating, calculating, optimizing, comparing. When that fragmentation eases, life can feel oddly more complete without significant external changes. Another transformation is the reorganization of significance. Certain worries diminish in intensity as they are no longer unconsciously regarded as ultimate. Social comparison, status anxiety, and excessive urgency begin to appear smaller when viewed against the finite reality of existence itself. Not unimportant, but rather proportionate. Simultaneously, simpler aspects frequently acquire importance. Attention, dialogue, rest, and meaningful presence. These elements cease to feel subordinate to achievement. An individual comes to understand that life is experienced through moments rather than through abstractions. Moreover, and perhaps most crucially, there is a reduction in the postponement of life. Individuals stop perceiving meaning as something that is indefinitely delayed into the future. They become increasingly conscious that existence is not something that awaits them in the future after sufficient optimization has been achieved. It is already happening now, subtly, within the ordinary framework of daily existence. This awareness can sometimes evoke sadness. However, it can also foster intimacy, a more profound connection with the reality of being alive while life continues to unfold.
What are your thoughts on the common misconceptions people have regarding existential awareness itself? There tends to be a belief that engaging in profound contemplation of finitude or limitation will render life more burdensome or somber. However, I question whether the avoidance of such awareness might, in fact, lead to a different kind of unconscious weight accumulating over time.
Many individuals tend to believe that existential awareness is fundamentally grim, as they link it solely to the concept of loss. However, when limitations are completely disregarded, life can take on an oddly superficial quality. Experiences become diminished because they are unconsciously perceived as endlessly repeatable. The concept of finitude lends organization to meaning. The transience of moments, the evolution of relationships, and the impossibility of holding on to life indefinitely contribute to the depth of existence. While evading this awareness may offer temporary solace, it can also lead to a sense of numbness. A person may remain sufficiently occupied to avoid confronting existential tension directly, yet feel disconnected enough that life starts to lose its emotional vibrancy. There exists a subtle weight in that form of unconscious detachment. When approached with care, existential awareness often yields the contrary effect to what people dread. It can render life more immediate, more detailed, and more fully experienced. This is not due to the absence of suffering, but rather because focus becomes more acute. Minor experiences gain prominence. Time appears more dynamic. Presence feels less abstract. Another misconception is the idea that awareness of finitude should result in significant transformation. However, the changes that occur are frequently more subdued than one might expect. An individual may gradually become less inclined to live life carelessly, less inclined to be emotionally detached from relationships, less inclined to perceive every moment as merely transitional, less inclined to structure life solely around external expectations while indefinitely deferring genuine living. These are nuanced changes, yet they significantly transform the emotional framework of life. Thus, existential awareness does not inherently imply a shift towards greater seriousness. It may, in fact, enable an individual to become more genuine, more adept at acknowledging that existence is delicate enough to warrant attention while it is still present.
When an individual starts to genuinely comprehend existence as finite, not merely on an intellectual level, but also emotionally and through personal experience, how does this transformation affect their relationship with attention, rhythm, and the manner in which they navigate everyday life?
There is frequently a diminished sense of unconscious urgency. Individuals cease to feel an overwhelming need to pursue every opportunity simply because it is available. Focus becomes more discerning as the understanding of existence as finite leads to a genuine appreciation of where attention is directed. This fosters restraint, yet it does not equate to deprivation. People grow less inclined towards incessant stimulation and more drawn to profound experiences. They start to appreciate a smaller number of things more deeply rather than a larger array superficially. The internal rhythm of life may also undergo transformation. Even if external obligations continue to be demanding, there is a reduction in psychological haste. Moments are no longer solely perceived as pathways to future results. An individual becomes more adept at fully experiencing events as they unfold, rather than mentally reframing everything as progress. This significantly alters the emotional landscape. There tends to be an increase in gratitude, albeit quieter than one might expect. It is not a performative form of appreciation, but rather a subtle acknowledgement that existence is fleeting enough to render ordinary moments significant. Conversations take on a different quality. Solitude is experienced differently. Even silence carries a new weight. Another crucial change is that the tendency to compare diminishes. When existence is comprehended in a more direct manner, numerous external indicators of value diminish in their emotional influence. An individual becomes less inclined to invest their limited life in perpetually negotiating status or pursuing validation that ultimately remains unsettled internally. This fosters a more tranquil relationship with oneself. Not due to the absence of ambition, but because one's identity is no longer wholly reliant on external affirmation. I believe that this tranquility represents one of the profound luxuries that individuals are currently seeking. Not abundance, but sufficient inner clarity to engage with existence more directly before it elapses.
What is it about the capacity to fully engage with one's own life in a state of presence and tranquility that seems to be becoming more and more of a luxury in today's society?
The rarity of uninterrupted presence has become increasingly apparent. In many settings, attention is perpetually fragmented. Individuals are consistently drawn outward toward information, reactions, performances, and comparisons. The mind seldom remains still long enough to directly experience existence without interference. Thus, when an individual can truly inhabit their life with authentic presence, it generates a sense of spaciousness that feels quite unusual in today's world. There exists a certain luxury in the absence of fragmentation. Numerous individuals find themselves divided across various psychological layers simultaneously, managing perceptions, anticipating future events, reflecting on the past, monitoring productivity, and engaging in social comparisons. Even during significant experiences, attention is frequently diverted elsewhere. Presence reinstates a sense of wholeness to experience. This wholeness is profoundly restorative as the nervous system is freed from the burden of constant internal division. Another aspect that contributes to its luxurious nature is that presence cannot be mass-produced. It cannot be acquired externally in any comprehensive manner. While certain conditions may facilitate it, the ultimate determinant lies in the quality of the relationship an individual maintains with their own existence. This makes presence increasingly precious in a culture that prioritizes acceleration and consumption. I believe that a calm presence transforms the emotional environment of life itself. Time appears less constricted. Experiences seem less trivial. Relationships feel more substantial. Even the most mundane moments acquire significance and depth. And perhaps this is the greatest luxury, to navigate through life without the constant urge to flee from it. To truly experience one's own life as it unfolds. Not flawlessly, not indefinitely, but sufficiently to acknowledge that existence itself might be the most precious gift we ever receive.
If an individual were to take a moment to sit in silence and reflect on the reality of their own existence, not merely as a theoretical concept, but as a tangible experience that is both emerging and fading simultaneously, what observations do you believe they might start to make?
I believe they may initially observe the extent to which life has been psychologically postponed. They may reflect on how often presence was set aside in favor of future resolutions. They might consider how many experiences were only partially engaged because their focus was directed elsewhere. However, in conjunction with that understanding, they may also perceive something more gentle. That existence has been consistently presenting itself through ordinary moments all along. Through conversations, attentiveness, silence, relationships, and even through simple awareness itself. Not as a spectacle, but as life unfolding quietly. And perhaps they would start to realize that existence does not require perfection before it can be embraced. It is only fully acknowledged while it remains present.
It may be argued that the most uncommon human resource is not merely time, but rather the very essence of conscious existence itself. The limited experience of being present, aware, observant, and alive within fleeting moments that can never be replicated once they have passed. Furthermore, Perhaps the more profound inquiry is not about the quantity of life we are able to incorporate into our existence, but rather how completely existence is genuinely experienced as life flows through us.